Welcome back. Let us start with a wrap of the topics we have debated during the past weeks. As Hobbes says, media messages are constructions. They are constructed by individuals and organizations with specific purposes. Media messages have economic and political context. They are constructed within economic and political contexts with impact on how they are created, the preferred meaning of such messages, and the way they are decoded and understood by audiences. Individuals negotiate meaning in media texts, audiences actively engage in the process of decoding meaning and of negotiating the meanings of these texts. We're interested how both medium, as McLuhan explained it, and the content as the board's spectacle communicate messages and spread ideologies. To understand this communication, we need to understand our audiences. Initially, we theorized audiences as passive, like Classwell's hyperdemic needle or Gerbner's cultivation theory, but now we consider active audiences explained by Stuart Hall's encoding and decoding as prosumers. Media tells stories. Stories are told as narrative, and so narrative is how the story is told. Narrative is also theorized as being character-driven, as we have seen in Propp's characters. And as Thornham and Purvis said, narratives can inform versions of the past and have the power to shape how the present might be understood in relation to them. We also discussed stereotypes. As Densei puts it, stereotypes are oversimplified assessments applied as generalizations constituting a form of biased prejudgment. Stereotypes come from somewhere, and this somewhere is most likely the media. Images, myths, and ideas around different people are fed to us by the media, and we develop stereotypical views based upon them. This dynamic is what we call representation. According to Webb, we live immersed in representation. It is how we understand our environments and each other. Today we talk about Jenny Kidd's Reader on Representation, where she offers the reader 5 ways of theorizing representation. We're going to talk about 2 of these: representation and myth, representation and identity politics. Media texts such as films and TV shows communicate to audiences using objects to convey a certain meaning. During that process of watching films, we associate or think of everything we see to a meaning that is embedded in our culture, history, or ideologies, turning every object we see into a code to something which helps us understand more about the text. Roland Barthes was a French semiotician who was concerned with the myths implicit in society. Kidd says that he was interested in what is seen and what is understood at the level of myth. His theory is the backbone of analysis in media studies. We can understand characters, genre, storyline, etc. through the signs and symbols in a text. This is found through media language, mise en sens, camera, editing, sound. Barth's semiotic theory broke down the process of reading signs and focused on their interpretation by different cultures or societies. According to Barth, signs had both a signifier, being the physical form of the sign as we perceive it through our senses, and the signified or meaning that is interpreted. Barth divided signs into denotations and connotations. The denotation of a sign is its literal meaning, like, for example, the apple denotes a red fruit. Denotations signify connotations, and connotation is the association of the denotation. For example, the denotations of an apple are intellect, good health, and maybe rich in some people. The interpretation is even different from one culture to the other. Like, for example, for middle upper class adults with children residents of a US city, the apple is a reference to education. Denotations and connotations are organized into myths, which is the place that has their ideological meaning. These make ideology seem natural. For example, a bulldog might activate a myth of Britishness. So how do we interpret meaning from signs and symbols? If we use the Apple brand as an example, Apple logo is one of the most famous logos across the world. But why is the logo of this company is bidden Apple? What is the semiotics of this logo? The first meaning of the logo, according to Rob Janoff, the man behind this brand, is that The Apple logo was supposed to represent an everyday object that everyone is familiar with and can afford. The nerdy aspect of this brand, the byte of the Apple has the same pronunciation as a byte in the computer, which is one of the most popular theories. However, some of the people came up with the idea of the first Apple's logo, where the logo depicts Sir Isaac Newton sitting under the apple tree. Next theory, the public found the more poetic inspiration of the logo, which is about the story of Adam and Eve's and the tree of the knowledge, which leads to the meaning that by using the Apple products can promise more knowledge. Additionally, this story represents that this company is one of the oldest in the technology field as well. The last and my favorite myth about the semiotics of Apple logo is about Steve Jobs, the co-founder and chairman of the Apple company. The byte represents that nobody's perfect, even this company. This is why the apple in the logo is bitten. It is no harm to say that all of these theories and stories are showing that the Apple logo has been subject to much studies and analyzations through the time. As simple as it is, just an apple, a bitten one, it has become one of the unique logos that shows the ideal of the brand in the logo. As you see from the different interpretations I just talked about, the audience, though have looked at it from different perspectives or interpretations, the ideal or the ideology of the brand still reached all. The denotative phase is a process of signification. The connotative is about the representation, and it is in these connotations we create myths. For example, the name Hollywood connotates such things as glitz, glamour, tinsel, celebrity, and dreams of stardom. Though the name Hollywood denotes an area of Los Angeles worldwide known as the center of the American movie industry. However, connotations can be both positive and negative. For example, lady carries a hint of both elegance and subservience. Kids use the example of the myth of the Apple user as a hipster, a poser, or as unimaginative followers of the latest hardware trends. The myth is created when the influence of the connotative meaning changed the denotative meaning, like, for example, being the thoroughly transformed word gay. The word originally meant in a good mood or inducing high spirits, but that meaning has changed now after using it to represent a man who is attracted to the same sex. These myths are not always easy to spot and so often go unchallenged, seeming to be intuitive, natural, consensual, and therein lies their power. Myth uses all suitable existing signs as its signifiers, not only written speech but also pictures, artistic representations, culture, phenomena, etc., that already have some meaning but acquire some additional meaning when they are used as myths. So it is embedded in a way that is not easy to spot and expressed through various means, which makes it powerful. According to Barthes, many of these mythic elements have become so naturalized and widespread in media representations that we hardly see them any longer. Another example of mythical speech from the cover of Paris Match, a black soldier giving the French salute. The denotative meaning is exactly this, a black soldier giving the French salute that is expressed through the image of the soldier making a certain gesture. The connotative meaning is France is a great empire and all serve it without racial discrimination. There are many ways in which these messages can be expressed using many other culturally created icons, but this is one of them. Though the message seems now clear, we do not spot it directly because it is represented in so many other ways and always embedded in a media object. Kidd says that myths such as the struggle for good over evil, the need for heroes, and the loss of women's innocence are a case in point things we encounter all of the time in film, TV, and advertising. Myth clearly sends a message, and this is intentional by placing some cultural objects out of context. If you look at the photo on the current slide, though the forbidden fruit is not identified in any religious books, popular tradition holds that Adam and Eve ate an apple from the forbidden tree in the Garden of Eden. The unnamed fruit of Eden thus became an apple under the influence of the story of the golden apples in Greek mythology. As a result, the apple became a sign for knowledge, immorality, temptation, the fall of man and sin. The same myth holds Eve as the one encouraging Adam to eat that apple, and evil is represented by the snake. So the message in the photo here is the myth, and through the myth we relate and understand the photo, making it a sign of seduction and temptation. In developing these myths, these representations of people, things, ideas, concepts, ways of living and being, we often create binaries. Claude Lévi-Strauss, another structuralist, spoke about the use of binary oppositions in narrative. Lévi-Strauss felt that culture is composed of hidden rules that give it meaning. According to him, uncovering these rules to understand its meaning can be done through the concept of binary oppositions. He believed that all human thought works by thinking through binaries or opposites. For example, good versus evil, male and female, humanity versus technology, old versus young, civilized versus savage. Essentially, us versus them. Levi-Strauss' ideas are readily applicable to media products. Indeed, Batman wouldn't be interesting unless he fought the Joker. Heroes need villains in order to demonstrate their heroism. Similarly, conflicts presented in newspapers in order to promote their readerships to take sides. Strauss called these conflicts binary oppositions. At their simplest, binary oppositions give us stories in which good battles evil, but there are countless other formulations of conflict found in media products: humanity versus technology, age versus youth. Importantly, Levi-Strauss tells us that binary oppositions also construct ideological positioning. Ideology in this sense refers to how stories reflect the values and beliefs of society. The conflicts presented in Star Wars, for instance, tell us that the greed and exploitation of Darth Vader are bad, at the same time as Skywalker's bravery and team-working skills are positive traits. In representing individuals and groups in certain ways, we create binaries, we create an other. The problem with the system of binary opposites is that it creates boundaries between groups of people and leads to prejudice and discrimination. One group may fear or consider the opposite group a threat, referred to as the other. The use of binary opposition in literature is a system of authors use to explore differences between groups of individuals, such as cultural, class, or gender differences. Authors may explore the gray area between the two groups and what can result from those perceived differences, like, for example, protester, freedom fighter, Reuter, looter. Another example is introduced by Edward Said. Edward Said said that the Occident, which is the Western world, created an image of the Orient, which is the Middle East. It became a manufactured representation, a myth of the Orient. It became an exotic, magical, savage, backwards depiction of that part of the world, a stereotypical one. The distant relationship between the Orient and the Occident dates back years ago. The Orient has been exaggerated, imagined, and fantasized. Full of rich cultural heritage, the East became the realm of exotic sensuality and spiritual mystics. The Orient and the Occident encountered in certain contact zone. In 1978, Edward Said published his notable work, Orientalism. Leaving the largest trace into the Orientalist tradition, he stated that the Orient is based on European experience, institutions, vocabulary, scholarships, imagery, doctrines, even colonial bureaucracies and colonial styles all reinforce the image of the other in Western systems. There is also a long history of Europeans portraying Egyptians as the other. As Said expressed, Europeans have often sought to claim the wonders of ancient Egypt and other non-Caucasian civilizations as their own, depriving the Egyptian peoples of their own history in the process, which can be seen obvious in the film Gods of Egypt. The movie is centered on a very loose interpretation of Egyptian mythology, and the majority of the primary cast members are white. Though Lionsgate and director Alex Proyas admitted fault and apologized, that doesn't change the fact that Gods of Egypt is yet another example of whitewashing characters of color, as well as cultural cutting. The movie is a representation of how Egyptians are portrayed in Western media. According to Dr. Zaya Hawass, this movie has nothing to do with the history of ancient Egypt. Moreover, there are so many historical episodes from Egypt's own past worth bringing to the big screen. Why not a biopic of Hatshepsut? For example, she was one of the most powerful and intriguing women in antiquity who became one of the greatest pharaohs of the epic 18th dynasty. In addition, many actors of color have been relegated to minor or uncredited roles. Not one of the primary cast members is of Middle Eastern or more specifically Egyptian descent. According to Murray and Yakin, in recent years, especially since 9/11, attention has turned to the representation of Muslim cultures and communities in particular. Muslims are depicted by mainstream Western discourses as a homogeneous group, incapable of independent thought and inherently backward in perspective, not least when it comes to embracing democracy and rights of women. It has been noted by Chris Whedon in her study of identity and culture that in much Western discourse on Muslim countries and communities, the language used reflects this assumption that only Western values and standards are valid. Such discourse is also marked by a homogenization of the Muslim other. An example to that is Netflix's popular TV show Bodyguard, which focused on Islamic terrorism. It pandered to every single stereotype of a Muslim, the covered, oppressed woman wearing the niqab, and the terrorist suicide bomber. For Edward Said, Orientalism as a discourse is a malicious one. Said directly challenged what Euro-American scholars traditionally refer to as Orientalism. Orientalism is an entrenched structure of thought, a pattern of making certain generalizations about the part of the world known as the East. As Said puts it, Orientalism was ultimately a political vision of reality whose structure promoted the difference between the familiar, Europe, West, us, and the strange, the Orient, the East, them. Representations as they relate to race, class, gender, age, disability, and sexuality are notoriously and historically problematic. It is not controversial to assert that in Western contexts, at least, there has been a privileging of white, middle class, heteronormative, and often male perspectives within the media and broader cultural output. Though othering there becomes a complicated and often dangerous process of myth-making, historically the media has promoted the center over the margins. This same center is what creates these myths and therefore creates images of individuals they don't share an experience with. Othering is the process of perceiving or portraying someone or something as fundamentally different or alien. To make matters worse, by defining the other through a particular discourse, you implicitly define yourself. If you say someone is savage, you are suggesting that you are civilized. If you say a sexuality is abnormal, you say that your sexuality is normal. If you say that another gender is weak, you are saying your gender is strong. So, for today's task, choose a media representation and examine how it is framed in different media. For example, you could look at how the Daily Mail and The Guardian create myths around Brexit or around Trump. Or you could look at how the concept of family is created as myth in media using specific examples. Consider the visual and verbal construction of these representations. Thank you for listening and see you in class.